The click of the shutter echoed louder than it should have. Edwin Marnell lowered the brass-bound camera from its perch atop the tripod, his breath curling in the cool October air. He didn't immediately move to retrieve the plate. Instead, he stood motionless beside the Hallowmere Bridge, staring down at the water that ran beneath it. Except it didn't. The river flowed, yes. It murmured softly around the stone piers, carried the scent of moss and cold slate, shimmered faintly under the morning light. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The water had depth, color, movement, but it held no reflection. Not of the bridge overhead, not of Edwin, not of the oaks that rose on either side, amber and crimson in the early Vermont fall. It was as though the surface had been scraped clean. He stepped back, boots crunching the frostbitten grass at the riverbank, and blinked hard. Still nothing. He crouched and leaned closer, squinting against the sunlight. The sky above him remained bright and clear, yet the water below looked like glass without gloss, a window into nowhere. "I must have exposed it wrong," he murmured, more to the trees than to himself. But even as he said it, Edwin knew it wasn't true. He'd aligned the lens properly, set the exposure to compensate for the overcast morning light. The plate had soaked in the scene for exactly 22 seconds. The river should have gleamed back a perfect mirror of the arch above it. He exhaled sharply and reached into his satchel for his field log, unsnapping the worn leather strap with shaking fingers. His pencil paused above the page, uncertain. Instead of measurements or focus notes, he wrote just one line. The water did not return the world. He stood again, brushing his coat sleeves as a wind moved through the hollow. It stirred the fallen leaves but made no ripple on the river. Edwin turned toward the camera and slid the plate into its protective case, carefully sealing it before packing the equipment. His hands, usually steady from years of field work, trembled slightly as he dismantled the tripod. Across the bridge, the narrow trail that led back to Dorset Hollow waited, lined by birch trees that swayed gently in the breeze. The bridge itself was as he'd documented it. 3 archways, hand-laid limestone, reinforced timber railings, built to last. He looked over his shoulder once more at the water. Still no reflection. That night at the boarding house where he kept a rented room, Edwin developed the plate by lantern light. The chemicals bubbled softly as he rotated the glass, watching the image emerge slowly. His breath caught in his throat. It was all there, the bridge, crisp and flawless, the grain of its stone arch visible even in monochrome. The trees, the shoreline, even the edge of his tripod just inside the frame. But beneath it, the river was pitch. Not black from shadow, not blurred from motion, just a pure, lightless absence. A severance between image and mirror. He stepped back from the table. The lantern flickered. Something whispered through the rafters above, too rhythmic for wind, too uneven for rodents. He turned, scanning the corners of the room. Empty. In the next room, someone coughed. Probably the landlord's son. Edwin refocused on the plate, now resting in its drying frame. A thought pressed against his mind, one he tried to push aside. What if the camera had not captured what he saw, but what he had missed? The following morning, he returned to the bridge before sunrise, leaving before the cook at the boarding house even lit the hearth. His boots were soaked by dew when he arrived. He stood on the same spot, heart heavy, staring at the river's glassy surface. Still no reflection. He stayed for hours, took no more photographs, made no sketches, just stood, watching, waiting, as if the water might remember how to return the world to him. He did not return to the boarding house that night. When his horse arrived back in Dorset Hollow alone, reins slack and saddle damp, the landlord alerted the constable. They searched the banks for a day and a half, found nothing. No broken equipment, no signs of struggle, not even footprints leading into the river. Only his field log remained, left on the desk beside the drying tray. His handwriting was sharp, even under pressure. The water did not return the world. The photograph was placed in Bureau archives under survey documentation, then quietly refiled after archivists failed to explain the missing reflection. For years, it was assumed to be a chemical defect or developer error, forgotten behind more pressing maps and rail plans. Until 1921, when the original plate was re-examined by a restoration chemist. The negative was flawless. There was no silvering error, no emulsion failure, no damage to the plate, and, most disturbingly, no trace of reflected light below the bridge. Not a single shimmer, not a blurred line, not even the faintest trace of the stonework. Only void. Silence in chemical form. The image was declared inconclusive, sealed again, and stored under a new category, anomalous optics. And Edwin Marnell was never seen again. The image sees what the eye refused to. The horse returned alone. It wandered down the slope from the eastern ridge just after noon, its leather bridle tangled in a broken strap, its flanks damp with a fine mist. What caught the attention of the quarrymen nearby was not just the absence of a rider, but the strange way the animal moved, steadily, obediently, as if following an instruction it had no memory of receiving. When it stopped at the edge of the riverbank where Edwin Marnell had been seen hours earlier, the men called out instinctively. "Marnell!" one shouted across the clearing. No reply came. Only the slow drip of water from the horse's fetlocks, oddly clean despite the journey. One of the men, a surveyor's apprentice named Calvin Breyer, stepped forward to examine it. He crouched low, running a hand beneath the animal's hooves. The legs were soaked, but the earth clinging to them was dry and flaky, as though baked from within. "That's not river mud," Calvin muttered, wiping his hand on his vest, glancing toward the water. "It's scorched." By dusk, news had reached the Vermont Topographical Bureau, whose offices overlooked the southern rail lines of Dorset Hollow. Edwin Marnell, 39, a contracted surveyor and civil lensman, had not returned from his morning assignment to photograph the Hallowmere Bridge. His ledger had listed the task plainly. Bridge 12C, Marnell River Span, East Angle Plate, October 2, 1884. The assignment was routine. Dorset Hollow, built on the back of timber and stone, relied heavily on the limestone trade. The bridge was vital for moving shipments down the rails toward the coast. That morning, Marnell had loaded his field kit, 26 pounds in total, onto the horse. A brass-lensed camera, folding tripod, iodine preparation box, dry plates wrapped in cloth, and a single lantern charged with alcohol fuel. His signature had been the last line entered in the field log. "He knew that terrain," said Inspector Julian Harth, the Bureau's lead coordinator, pacing the office as the news reached him. 10 years with us. Never once missed a return. "Maybe the river swelled," offered another clerk, not looking up from his ink work. "It didn't," Harth replied. "That water's low this time of year." A child could wade it. That night, under Bureau protocol, a single retrieval search was organized, not a rescue, but recovery. But the men sent reported nothing. No prints, no broken equipment, no sign of disturbance. Only the bridge, standing silent over water that reflected nothing at all. 3 days later, a sealed envelope arrived at the Bureau from a courier who claimed he'd been instructed to hold it until Monday, if the man did not return. Inside were Marnell's final notes, penned in steady black ink, with the last page folded over twice and marked with the Bureau's crest. "Bridge structure remains sound," one line read. "Stone integrity uncompromised. However..." The following paragraph was more erratic. His pen had scratched deeper into the paper, and the ink bled near the margins. "Observed something unnatural in the plate," he wrote. "Exposure time correct. Light calibration stable. But no mirrored image, not even a trace. The water." A long dash ran across the bottom of the page. Beneath it, in smaller script, "The water did not return the world." The Bureau quietly filed the report without public notice. Inspector Herth signed a short dispatch. Surveyor presumed lost. Cause, misadventure in the shallows. But not everyone was content to accept that. 2 years later, in 1886, a note appeared in the personal ledger of Dr. Henry Ruth, an independent physicist who had studied early gas diffraction in light. While inspecting a sample of Marnell's chemical residues for archival purposes, Ruth scribbled a marginal annotation beside a dried iodine swab. Observed unusual reaction when exposed to open flame. No smoke, only receded glow. Possibly indicative of a surface that swallowed light. The words were never published. Ruth died in 1887 of lung fever. His ledger sat unnoticed for nearly a decade, stored beneath a stack of incomplete mineral maps. But among the locals of Dorset Hollow, Marnell's absence became something else. Quiet lore passed in stables and train yards. "You know that river's got memory," one railway worker told another, pointing toward the bridge. "It took him, sure. But it didn't get wet doing it." More curious was the account of Jonah Pell, an older man who'd been Marnell's occasional assistant. He remembered seeing the horse the day it returned. Its eyes were fogged over, like steam had got into 'em, he'd whispered to a shopkeeper years later. But it didn't blink. Just stood there, waitin', like it wanted someone else to ride. The official records, however, made no mention of any of this. The Bureau's position was final. A single paragraph in the 1884 year-end report read, "Field Agent E. Marnell lost in execution of duties. File closed. No further action deemed necessary." But the silence left behind was heavier than any fact. Even in the Bureau itself, younger agents would hesitate when logging assignments near the bridge. Some noticed their instruments behaved strangely near the eastern ridge, levels would skew, compasses stuttered, and glass lens caps cracked without cause. Still, the bridge remained. The rail lines continued. The river flowed beneath them. Only the reflection did not. History, however, has never been kind to dismissals. The room was silent when Walter Denham stepped into the archive vault of the Northmont Society. The morning of November 3, 1892, carried the breath of frost along the windows, and the lamps within the brick-walled chamber burned low with a pale orange haze. The glass plate lay already unboxed atop a silk-draped pedestal, untouched, unaltered, and staring upward like an open eye. Denham did not speak. He only adjusted his spectacles, glanced at his thermometer, 48 degrees Fahrenheit, and leaned forward. The silence was not emptiness, but tension. A breath held too long. As a chemist trained in photographic emulsions and the emerging study of light interference, he had seen hundreds of plates before. None ever gave him pause. This one did. He gently lifted the Marnell plate with gloved fingers, the glass cold and heavier than expected. Every detail above the waterline was etched in perfect precision: stone arches, iron rails, the lattice of bare October branches behind. But beneath the bridge there was nothing. No twin curve, no mirrored trees, not even a shimmer of light bending around the shape. Just void. He shifted the plate beneath the stereoscope. The ripples were there. He hadn't noticed them at first. Fine, delicate lines in the water's surface, proof the river was not still when the image was taken. That should have created distortion in the reflection, yes, but not its complete absence. And certainly not the sensation he now felt in his chest. A quiet pressure, as if gravity itself was bending toward the glass. Denham scribbled quickly in his notebook. Exposure time, 22 seconds. Emulsion intact. No silver migration. No halation bloom. He paused, then underlined one word twice. Refused. He adjusted the lens again, angling for any flaw. None. His hands trembled slightly, though the room was not cold. The back of his neck prickled. The reflection should exist whether or not it's seen, he muttered aloud, unable to keep the thought contained. But here, it is refused. A knock startled him from the doorframe. A junior assistant, red-faced from running, clearly nervous, stepped in, holding a folded sketchbook and a sealed envelope. "We found something in the West Archives, sir." Related to the Marnell case, Denham took the sketchbook first. The pages had yellowed, but the graphite lines remained clear. A bridge drawn in careful strokes, its upper half bold and crisp until the arches faded downward, dissolving into emptiness. Beneath, the artist had written in a young hand, "It was there, but not there." "Like a dream you forget too soon. Eliza Morton," the assistant said. "She was 17 when she saw the original bridge." Gave this to the local magistrate who filed it away. Denham's eyes lingered on the sketch. The downward lines. They didn't end in smudge. They ended in deliberate erasure. A chosen omission. "What else?" he asked quietly. The envelope. Inside it, an internal notice from 1900, signed by Northmont Society curator Ellis Ray. It read simply, "Effective immediately. The Marnell plate is to be removed from public rotation. Do not allow physical contact. Store under red cloth, temperature-controlled vault, only." Denham looked up. "Why?" The assistant hesitated. They said it, reacted. The vault's air shifted, a faint draft brushing Denham's cheek like breath from a crack in stone. He turned back to the plate and, with hesitation, pressed 2 fingers gently to its corner. Warm. Not room temperature. Not body heat. A warmth that pulsed just once beneath the glass, then faded, as if it had recognized something in his touch and let go. He pulled back, shaking his head. "It's impossible." But it wasn't. That night, 2 senior archivists who had entered to perform standard cataloging collapsed mid-examination. Witnesses claimed both men fell backward as if pushed, their hands still inches from the glass. When roused, each repeated the same phrase. It grew warm beneath the fingertips. Like breath behind ice. Neither returned to the vault again. Denham, for all his logic, could not forget what he had felt, nor the final line in the curator's revised record, written in ink that bled slightly across the page, as though the pen had trembled during its final stroke. Objects can forget to mirror themselves, but not without cost. The first anomaly struck just after midnight. Professor Bernard Craythorne stood alone in the lower observatory wing of Holliford College, sleeves rolled, breath fogging faintly in the late October chill. The Lippmann interferometer on the oak workbench ticked with faint mechanical clicks, measuring microshifts in returning wavelengths. Beside it, protected beneath a padded velvet cloth, rested the Marnell plate, recovered, cleaned, and once again ready to face scrutiny. Craythorne adjusted the calibration lens, his eyes narrowed behind gold-rimmed spectacles. A fine bead of sweat gathered at his temple. He had conducted hundreds of tests in this chamber, on fluoropigments, silver halide drift, even early attempts at X-ray refraction, but none had prepared him for what the plate refused to give back. The glass was still cool, still perfect, still empty. Lines of wavelength data printed steadily across the parchment reel beside him until they didn't. At precisely 1:03 a.m., the ink ceased mid-mark. The stylus arm continued its rhythm, but no pigment touched the paper. Craythorne leaned forward, blinking. He ran his fingers along the parchment, dry. The ink well hadn't run out. The stylus simply wasn't delivering it, as if the light measurements had dropped to 0. He removed the plate and replaced it with a control sample. Within seconds, the wavelengths returned. Steady, predictable, visible. Reinserting the Marnell plate once more, Craythorne watched the stylus begin to tremble. No line appeared. He spoke aloud, not out of fear, but incredulity. "Light behaves as though returning from an absence," he murmured, scribbling the phrase onto his notes. "Not an obstruction, an absence." The college custodian, Mr. Enderley, later recalled hearing Craythorne mutter to himself until nearly dawn. When asked what disturbed him most, Enderley replied, It wasn't that he sounded afraid. It was that he didn't. Graythorne submitted his findings to the Royal Photometric Register that winter. The letter he received in return was terse. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, but fear this experiment may reflect more on the subject's psychology than the plate's optics." The rejection didn't matter. By then, something else had begun. 2 years later, in the spring of 1910, a second attempt was mounted, this time by Dr. Miriam Enslow's protégé, Elias Grafe, who traveled to Dorset Hollow on behalf of the Bureau. But when Grafe broke his leg descending the riverbank and was evacuated by mule cart, the task fell to a quiet junior surveyor from the Topographical Bureau named Dr. Benjamin Lorne. Lorne was methodical, diligent, and deeply skeptical of what he called optical ghost stories. He arrived at the foot of the Hallowmere Bridge on a warm July morning, carrying a dry-plate camera, standard measuring rods, and Bureau-issued graphite ledgers. The river was low that summer. The Marnell River's surface shimmered faintly, stirred by breeze and dragonfly wings. The bridge above it stood in clean symmetry, arch over arch, stone over time. He mounted his tripod, aimed the camera toward the water, and waited. Lorne took the photograph at 2:17 p.m. Sunlight was at angle. The shadows aligned. There were no birds, no human figures, no optical interference. The exposure ran for 17 seconds. When he developed the plate that evening inside his canvas tent, he froze. No reflection. He blinked twice. Then again. The trees appeared crisp. The bridge rails were pristine. The sky and clouds vivid. But below the bridge, where the water should have mirrored the world, it showed nothing. Not distortion, not blur, just absence. The following morning, Lorne returned and took 6 more plates, some angled low, some high, some at shallow banks. All returned the same result. No reflection, no light bounce, no visible artifact beneath the waterline. He telegrammed the Bureau. It read, "Replication successful. Image refuses return. Preparing to send plates, awaiting further instruction." The reply arrived 2 days later, short and cold. Cease operations. Secure equipment. Leave site, but by then the decision had already been made for him. On the evening of July 18th, a storm rolled into the hollow. The wind came not from the west, but from below, the riverbed itself. Lorne stood in his tent, staring at the camera plate on the drying wire. It had begun to warp slightly. The gelatin emulsion didn't ripple. It pulled, like something beneath it wanted to unmake the captured moment. He opened the tent flap, called out to his horse, and heard only silence. The air outside felt wrong, thick. It hummed, faintly, like a tuning fork struck at distance. Lorne stepped out barefoot, the dirt beneath his soles warm, too warm for night. He walked to the bridge. No frogs, no crickets, no birds. Only the river, which no longer moved. The surface had frozen, not with ice, but with stillness. It lay black and flat, not like glass, but like absence, like a piece of sky misplaced. Lorne stepped closer to the edge. His own reflection did not greet him. In its place, only the shape of the bridge, standing in perfect detail above a void that held no version of him. A cold drop fell on his forehead, though the sky was clear. He looked up. Nothing. He stepped back. And then, from behind, he heard the faint buzz of telegraph wire crackling inside his field tent. He turned. Ran. Inside, the telegraph relay clicked once, then again. One line came through. "I am standing over nothing visible." That was the last anyone heard from Dr. Lorne. By dawn, his tent was found torn from the inside, his supplies untouched, the camera plates stacked neatly in a wooden crate, and the bridge still holding. Authorities sealed off the site within the week, citing unstable terrain due to water undermining. Barbed wire went up. Entry was forbidden. Years passed. In 1946, during a routine structural assessment by the State Infrastructure Commission, a maintenance crew examining the base supports discovered that the stone pillars of the bridge were eroding, but only on the side facing the missing reflection. The opposing base remained pristine. No natural explanation followed. No tremors, no current variance, no runoff damage. Just one side of the world forgetting its anchor. The report was filed and quietly archived, and so the Hallowmere Bridge remained, whole above, hollow below, a structure that spanned more than just a river, a threshold no longer capable of returning what entered its eye. Science had reached the bridge's edge, and light would go no further. The knock came just after midnight, 2 sharp raps on the leaded glass of Walter Denham's door. He was already awake, hunched over a stack of chemical journals in his study, the fire behind him reduced to a glow that barely warmed the soles of his slippers. Outside, the wind thinned into high whistles across the eaves. He rose stiffly, brushing chalk from his lapel, and opened the door to a boy in a wool cap, breath fogging in the cold. No words were needed. Denham had been expecting this. The boy handed over a small leather case, sealed at both ends and tagged with the Northmont Society's wax emblem. Denham nodded once, then shut the door. Inside, he worked with deliberate speed. He placed the glass plate, Marnell's photograph, under his magnifier, wiped his lenses clean, and adjusted the angle of the lamplight until the image revealed its strange contradiction. The full bridge, clear and sharp, suspended over a surface that refused to echo it. "The reflection should exist whether or not it's seen," Denham muttered, voice dry from hours without speech. "But here, it is refused." He made his measurements methodically. Temperature logged at 48 degrees Fahrenheit, exposure time confirmed at 22 seconds, chemical emulsion density balanced. There was no fogging, no bleeding, no evidence of light spill. The river should have mirrored everything above it, even in poor light. Yet the surface remained a void. Not black, not blurred, but something else, a refusal, a silence where image should be. 3 days later, Denham's report was filed, then buried. He spoke little after that. In a cold chamber of Holliford College, 1908, Professor Bernard Craythorne adjusted the brass dials of his Lippmann interferometer with trembling precision. He was no stranger to optical anomalies. He'd once tracked the refractive ghosting in cathedral-stained glass across 4 counties. But this was different. The Marnell plate sat fixed beneath the scanning light. As Craythorne narrowed the range of spectral measurement, the device trembled, not violently but rhythmically, as if the light itself was breathing. "Wavelength irregularities," he noted aloud, his voice steadier than his pulse. "Here and here again. Light behaves as though returning from an absence." He ran the scan again, to confirm. Same result. It wasn't blocked, it was lost, as though the space beneath the bridge swallowed the light and failed to send anything back. He submitted the findings to the Royal Photometric Register with high confidence. They returned the paper within a week, unreviewed. A typed note was clipped to the cover page. Psychological contamination suspected. Craythorne didn't argue. He simply locked the plate in a drawer and requested a sabbatical. In 1910, a telegram arrived at the Vermont Topographical Bureau from Dr. Miriam Enslow. Though female scholars rarely commanded respect in the field, Enslow had proven herself repeatedly, mapping fault lines no man had traced, surviving expeditions in terrain that turned others back. She was blunt, methodical, and precise. Her telegram read, "Prepared to replicate Marnell conditions at Hallowmere site. Dry plate method. Expect identical light behavior. Standing over nothing visible." Enslow. That was the last message ever received from her. A week later, 2 men from the Bureau arrived to collect her belongings. They found no trace of her equipment or presence, only a series of bare footprints leading to the riverbank, stopping at the edge. The bridge loomed overhead, silent, intact, and still without reflection. In an internal memo, the Bureau cited unstable terrain and ordered the area fenced off indefinitely. But one of the engineers, Thomas Hargrove, a quiet man with too many thoughts and too few friends, returned alone a year later with a maintenance crew to inspect the bridge foundations. What they found was stranger than erosion. The stone supports on the northern side, facing the bank where the reflection should have been, were worn down unevenly, as if the very river had gnawed at them from an angle that defied current or flow. The southern supports, however, remained untouched, pristine. The erosion hadn't followed water logic, it had followed optical logic. In a low voice, Hargrove muttered to one of the workers, "Whatever's under that bridge didn't come from the river." But the Bureau denied the findings, and Hargrove's report was never filed. Years later, when folklorist Ian Gallo published the Dorset Hollow manuscript, few took it seriously outside of fringe circles. It compiled oral accounts from the area. 3, in particular, stood out. All from men traveling the bridge at twilight. Each described the same phenomenon: arches rising over a surface that looked wrong. Not flat, not rippling, just empty. No stars reflected. No light bounced. The world above existed. Below, it did not. In one account, the traveler refused to cross. He waited until daylight, even though he could see the far side. "It was like the world was waiting to forget itself," he told Gallo, "like the bridge went nowhere but down." The manuscript gained limited attention until Gallo appended a final theory near the end, a belief that the river rejects false bridges. Perhaps, he wrote, the structure was built in defiance of something already buried. Perhaps the water knows, and does not forgive. Meanwhile, skeptics put forward rational explanations. Chemical fogging, they said. Quarry runoff could have introduced copper into the water, and copper, in dense concentration, can disrupt light reflection. A logical answer until samples from the riverbed came back clean. No trace elements, no anomalies. Others accused Marnell himself. A criminal theory emerged. Perhaps he had tampered with the photograph to hide a surveying error. Perhaps he'd made a mistake in his measurements and tried to cover it by doctoring the image. But the 1921 layer analysis crushed that theory. The negative was pure. No knife marks, no exposure blending, no light sealing. The plate was whole, untouched, and so each theory met the same fate. The rational one failed the test of chemistry. The criminal one failed the test of evidence. The paranormal one, rejected, but never disproved, lingered like a fog that refused to lift. Among the town's few remaining elders, a quiet story still whispered in the corners of old general stores and shuttered schools. They spoke of an older bridge, one that had once stood in the same place long before Dorset Hollow was ever founded. No maps showed it. No records confirmed it. Only stories from men who claimed to have seen stone bones in the mud when the river ran low. They said the new bridge was built not over water, but over a memory the land tried to forget. And then others took it further. They said Marnell's photograph wasn't missing a reflection. It was showing a different one not meant to be seen. Every theory still leaves something unreturned. At exactly 3:17 a.m. on March 11, 1909, the Hallowmere Bridge collapsed. There was no thunder of stone, no groan of timber, no cry from the earth. Only silence, a complete, unnatural stillness that blanketed Dorset Hollow like a held breath. A single barn owl perched on the fence post near the river opened its beak to cry and made no sound. The trees did not rustle. The frost-hardened grass did not shift. The air, suddenly metallic, carried the smell of struck iron, sharp and electric. In the village, dogs whined and hid beneath porches. Lamps flickered without wind. No one saw the bridge fall, but everyone knew it had. At dawn, a young clerk named Martin Elwell, on his routine patrol for the town's maintenance crew, arrived at the riverbank and froze mid-step. The bridge was gone. No rubble, no splash, no trace of a collapse. Only the naked banks remained, the riverbed exposed and dry like a forgotten scar. Martin's breath fogged in front of him as he approached the edge, stepping over a patch of frost that had formed in a perfect circle, then another and another. Dozens of frost rings, symmetrical and spiraled outward from where the center of the bridge had stood. He crouched slowly, hands shaking, and picked up a stone. He dropped it toward the bed of dry shale. It did not fall. The stone hung in the air for a second, maybe less. Then it vanished, as though it had been swallowed mid-descent. Martin staggered backward. His heart pounded against his ribs. He glanced around, but there was no one, no sound, not even the call of birds, only the echoing silence of absence. By the time authorities arrived, hours later, the river had returned. The water flowed as before. Yet even then, under the morning sun, not a single reflection showed on its surface. Not of the trees, not of the men, not even of the bridge that was no longer there. In the years that followed, the event was quietly sealed in municipal records under the classification of land collapse due to erosion, though no geological survey ever confirmed instability. Men came from the bureau, suits crisp and speech formal, asking short questions and offering shorter explanations. But in hushed tones, the locals whispered of the frost rings, of the silence, of the shadows that did not bend. They spoke of the boy who dared skip a stone across the surface that summer, only to vanish himself before the last ripple broke. The bridge was never rebuilt. In 1976, a third-floor assistant archivist at Maryston University named Harold Keene was processing a batch of misfiled photographic glass plates when he paused over one marked Botanical Study, 1884. It wasn't a plant. The plate, dusty and sealed in an aged cardboard sleeve, bore the unmistakable outline of the Hallowmere Bridge. Harold held it up to the light. The arches, the trees, the river, all clear. And yet the river returned nothing. No reflection, not a shimmer, just void. Keene frowned. He'd studied dozens of wet collodion plates. He knew how light should behave, how silver nitrate etched detail into truth. But this was not truth. This was absence. He carried the plate to the university's optical lab and fed it into the scanner. As the machine processed the negative into digital relief, something unfamiliar began to form. Beneath the bridge's base, nestled in the darkest fold of the river's void, lines emerged. Curved, symmetrical, unnatural, an inverted span. A bridge that no hand had built, existing not in the water, but within it. The arches mirrored the original, but twisted, reversed, and entirely alien in construction. Harold backed away from the monitor. He left the lab, locked the plate in its container, and filed a sealed request to the university's Office of Anomalous Studies. Within the week, the image was logged under Anomalous Optics, case number 88-14. Access was restricted. The lab tech who processed the scan declined to speak about the project again. Harold never discussed the image publicly, but he stopped walking near water. Even rain puddles made him flinch. Today, in a dimly lit hallway of the Dorset County Museum, a replica print of the Marnell plate hangs behind a double-paned display case. Most visitors glance past it, noting the caption and the year, mistaking the absence of reflection for artistic flaw. But once in a while, someone looks closer. A boy, perhaps, leaning in with his face nearly to the glass. A traveler tracing the arches with quiet interest. And then, in the reflection of the glass, not the river, they notice it. Their own face fading. Not at once, but subtly. The jawline dissolving. The eyes growing faint. A hint of breath on the wrong side of the pane. Museum staff replace the glass every 2 years. The last piece warped on its own, bending at the corners despite no change in temperature or light. It had only one fingerprint on it. No staff member claimed it. And when asked what the print reveals, the curator only says, "When you look closely, you'll notice your own reflection fades first." If cases like this fascinate you, Subscribe and turn on notifications for the next file. Disclaimer: this script is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, institutions, and incidents are invented or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental, created solely for entertainment.